or
I think as long as we have the link for the public, we should be okay. Because it seems like members of the public are showing up.
well, it says we're recording, so can we start?
Say again?
It says we're recording. So
I'm
he was
recording it through
suggest-
Zoom so we can post it later. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to repost the audio.
So we're okay to start.
Yeah, we'll just post this later.
Okay. Well, after all that, I guess it's time for the chair to take over. Sorry, everybody.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
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 Let me get my meat gavel. It is 6:26 p.m. Good evening. Chair Warwick is not able to attend tonight's meeting. I will be sitting in his place. My name is Zain Mahmood, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Citizens Advisory Committee for the CCTA. I call this meeting to order at 6:27 p.m. Sorry. The meeting has been now convened. Due to the shelter in place and COVID-19, the Citizens Advisory Committee has chosen Zoom as its meeting platform. During the meeting, please mute your mic. If you haven't done already, please mute your mic now. These are instructions in regards to how you would operate on Zoom. I will request any committee questions and comments on an agenda item. If you would like to speak, please physically raise your hand in the video. Fifi or I will call upon you. Please unmute your mic. After you speak, please remute your mic. Are we getting feedback?
That's why I thought you met a long time ago. Before I met you.
Someone is unmuted, yes.
Okay, I'm going to begin again from the beginning. I will request any committee questions and comments on an agenda item. If you would like to speak, please physically raise your hand within your video. Fifi or I will call upon you. If you are unable to speak, unable to physically raise your hand, you may unmute your mic and speak, and we will follow up and call upon you. When you do speak, please unmute your mic. After you speak, please remute your mic to ensure that we don't have any feedback. I will request any public comment. If any members of the public are attending this meeting and wish to speak during an agenda item, please raise your hand using the Zoom platform, or you can press *9 if you are on the phone. Fifi or I will call upon you to speak and unmute your mic. You will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, your mic will be automatically remuted. Your hand will be lowered. If an action is required on an agenda item, the chair will call for a vote. Fifi will conduct the roll call vote. When Fifi calls upon you, please unmute your mic, announce your vote, and then remute your mic. Fifi, if you can assist, please take roll call with us now.
Okay, when I call your name, please indicate your attendance by stating present or raising your hand. Committee Member Bristow. Committee Member Bauer.
Present.
Committee Member Bustamante. Committee Member Hammond.
Present.
Committee Member Hurley.
Present.
Committee Member Isola. Am I just not seeing you? There you are. Committee Member Linder. Committee Member Miller.
Here.
Committee Member Moriarty. Committee Member Powles.
Here.
Committee Member Rosenberg.
Present.
Committee Member Vega. Committee Member Yao.
Present.
Vice
Present.
Chair Mahmood.
Present.
And Chair Wyrick. Okay. Vice Chair Mahmood, please note that Committee Member Bustamante, Committee Member Vega, and Chair Wyrick are all absent.
It has been,
Fifi, did you get the new member?
Yes, I did.
okay. The next item, let's see, can you hear me? The next item on the agenda is public comment. Fifi, have you received any public comment?
We have not received any public comment.
Is there anybody wishing to speak during public comment on an item that is not a part of the agenda? If so, please raise your hand or press 9 and I or the staff will call upon you. We don't, we're gonna move on to item C, as we have not received anybody's hand or anybody's interruption, right? Anybody there?
We have not.
Okay. The next item on the agenda is approval of the summary of actions from July 15, 2019. Are there any changes, comments, etc. from the committee? If so, please raise your hand or press *9 if you're attending by phone. If anybody from the public wishes to speak, please raise your hand or press *9. If there's no further discussion, do I have a motion and a second?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second,
I'm sorry, who was the second from?
me, Brad Powles.
Thank you.
Everybody voting in favor?
So we're going to move ahead with the roll call vote for this item as well. So Committee Member Bristow,
Jesus. I don't want to be unmuted. I want to be able to talk.
Committee Member Bauer,
Approved.
Committee Member Bauer, how do you vote?
Approved.
Approved, thank you. Committee Member Hammond, how do you vote?
Approved.
Thank you. Committee Member Hurley, how do you vote?
Approved.
Committee Member Isola, how do you vote?
Approved.
Committee Member Linder, Committee Member Miller, how do you vote?
Approve.
Committee Member Moriarty, how do you vote?
Approved.
Thank you. Committee Member Powles, how do you vote?
Approve.
Committee Member Rosenberg, how do you vote?
Approved.
Thank you. Committee Member Yao, how do you vote?
Approved.
Approved. Committee of, Chair Wyrick is absent. Vice Chair Mahmood, how do you vote?
Approved.
Motion passes unanimously by all members present.
Thank you, Fifi. The next items are informational. They consist of the CAC attendance log, the authority's upcoming meeting schedule, which would be in your agenda. Does anyone have any questions or comments? If yes, please raise your hand. Or if you're attending by phone, please dial *9. Okay, I will be moving on. We have went over the consent calendar, the attendance log, and the upcoming meeting calendar. Nobody has any questions, so we will move on to our regular agenda item, item 3-1. The next item on our agenda is the fiscal year 2019 to 2020 budget for the authority and CMA presented by Chief Financial Officer Brian Kelleher, which includes approval requested to amend the fiscal year budget from 2019 to 2020 budget for the authority and Congestion Management Agency. Is Brian available?
Good evening. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show you the PowerPoint presentation I gave to the authority board last week. And give me 1 second. All right, so what you should see now is the PowerPoint presentation mentioning the proposed amendment reducing the Measure J sales tax budget for fiscal year 2019-20. I'm going to go through this quickly because all of you are probably much better than I am at knowing everything that's going on and the economic impacts that are affecting all of you in your cities and regionally and globally. So as we all know, with the COVID-19, the shelter in place has made some dramatic hits in sales tax, not just for the county here, but all of the individual cities that fund the necessary projects and programs in the cities you live in, as well as what we're doing here at the authority. So historically, we take our budgets in June. I'm working on the budget to take in June for next fiscal year as well. But in last June, we had a budgeted amount of $91,800,000. So every quarter we get an update. A couple months after the quarter ends, we get from the state of California. They give us a detailed information on what industry sectors are performing, if they're over, projecting than they did the prior quarter from the previous calendar year, and we look at those and we make an assessment. So when we took the mid-year budget in beginning of March to the authority board, based on our analysis, and we contract out our sales tax analysis with a firm by the name of HDL. A lot of cities and a lot of counties use them as well. And so what they do is they go in and they do a really deep dive into the sales tax, as well as what we do here at the authority. We were looking at a revenue projection of $94 million. So since COVID-19 in the middle of March, we're looking at, we were originally looking at a recovery sometime this summer, but as we look past the end of this fiscal year that ends June 30th, we're going to see a bigger impact next year. But so as part of this budget item, we took a revenue estimate to the board at $80.5 million. So that was a decrease of about $13.5 million from where we were projected to be. Let me go to the next slide. So as we know, when it comes to budgeting, it's really hard to do, and we take a number of economic indicators and we try and come up with some CPI, and we try and look at some spending habits, and we try and see what other economic indicators we have in a normal year. But right now, we honestly have no idea. We have no idea when everybody's going to go back to work. We don't know how long this is going to last. We don't know if this is going to, come back this winter. But we're focused on just this fiscal year. So what we're doing to mitigate these losses is get in front of the board, which we did last month, and let them know that our projections are $80.5 million. And so On a monthly basis, like I mentioned, we get information from the state. The state says this is your annual true or your quarterly true up. The true up payment usually comes 2 months after the quarter ends. So we got our true up payment in May for the quarter ending in March. And so that put us at a total revenue of $70.5 million. So based on our budget projection, based at looking at the individual industries on your left-hand side of the screen, we looked at autos and transportation. Nobody's using their cars. That's down about, we were projecting down about 55%. You can see some of the other ones, fuel and service stations is down 50%. So then they also came up with the state of California had a 12-month deferral plan. First, it was a deferral plan to allow people to pay 90 days, give them an extra extension of 90 days. Then there's the 12-month payment plan. So we don't know how many people have signed up for it. We don't know if anybody on the 90-day is not going to pay in the 90-day time period. We don't know if some of the 12-month deferral people are going to pay. So there's about a $3.5 million hit there. So that's how we get down to about the $80.5 million. I feel very strongly that we're going to come really darn close to that number. I hope we exceed that number so that we can pay out more funds to the local street maintenance, as well as the projects and programs divisions that truly need the money. So as an overview, just looking back at the last few fiscal years, you can see we had some really strong growth in 2018, 2019. Again, there's the original budget we had at $91.8 million. When we did the strategic plan just last year, we took a look at some trends, and we knew we were coming up on a slight recession. We had no idea it was going to be this big. So here we have our projection of a 14.3% reduction for this fiscal year. And the number I'm using for next year is $76.5 million. That's another 5%. So if you kind of combine those together, you're really close to a 20% reduction. We will be at the authority looking at all our quarterly reports and reporting back to the board, trying to get a good feel for what our numbers are going to be next year. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'm open to any questions, but we did our best to work with HDL to go through all the individual industries, and based off of the amount of funds that we've received so far to the date, $70.5 million, we feel really strongly that $80.5 million is what we're going to receive this year. And depending on when a vaccine or how it works with people going back to work, people traveling, our projections again for the decrease for next year at about $70.5 million, 76.5, I'm sorry.
I have a question if you have a second.
Sure.
So in the event that this budget for the following year comes out and these projections are not met, do we know what happens after that if there is a true up and there's an issue where unfortunately it comes below it?
Yeah, so when we do our budgets, we take a lot of capital projects and a lot of projects for the local cities, and there's a lot of return to source funds through all the bus agencies and the LSM funds. We don't pay it all out right away. It's kind of like a pay as you go. As we collect it and we meet our projections, we pay that out. Currently, staff in the projects division and the planning division, they're all looking at all their individual contracts, and they'll be working on a staff report that'll be going to the board next month or in July as well, identifying all of those capital projects. So any of the capital projects that we're working on, a lot of them are funded by federal, state, and local funds. And those are earmarked grants that typically will pay for it. So those will continue. Anything that's based off of sales tax, any projects or contracts that are trying to work on individual items, we'll see what we can do to put them on, hit the pause button, stop them, slow them down, do what we can to put them on hold until the recovery starts to come back. And we're doing our best to identify those and reach out to our consultants right now, just trying to be ahead of the curve, just like everybody else is doing at your individual cities and things like that.
Thank you for your time. And does anybody else have questions for Mr. Brian Kelleher? Are there any
Yes.
from the, go ahead.
I see Mr. Hammond's got his hand up.
I found the slides very interesting and very helpful. And it certainly seemed to include information that was not provided within the meeting packet. Is there a way to get copies of those slides? An electronic copy would be ideal, of course.
Yeah, I can have Fifi send them out to the group. I'll email the PowerPoint to her and then she can send it out to you guys.
I will.
I have a quick question. The quick question is, your action is basically just to set the number and get some sort of consensus about the number, but then the actual actions and impacts outside of that are voted individually after the number has been approved.
Yeah, our intention was to get in front of the board, let them know what impacts we were seeing here at the authority, here at the county level, where the half-cent sales tax add-on. Each individual city is going to see something different. We have a very diverse retail pool. We also have the car dealerships and much other things where individual smaller cities may not have them. There's a lot of lease cars out there. So we took a holistic look at every individual category, went through and did some analysis. And then we also, Peter Engel and I, he's in charge of the programs. He works with the bus agencies. We had a number of conference calls with them, telling them what the impacts are. They rely a lot on our sales tax money to fund their programs. Obviously, this is going to be a big hit to them for next fiscal year. So our actions were to let the board know we're working on it, let the board know that we have an action plan, let them know what our future levers that we can pull as this continues. The length of this COVID-19 will force some maybe hard decisions if it goes very long, but it's going to be a few years before we see $94 million of sales tax revenue again. And then the larger piece is Hisham's on this as well, and he'll be talking about from the strategic plan, that the larger hit between now and 2034 and what this impact can mean to some of the regions as well.
Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak?
I don't see any raised hands.
All right, that's it. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate you coming out here online. And the next item on the agenda is the proposed interim measures to prepare for Measure J, sales tax revenue reduction due to COVID-19 pandemic, presented by Director of Programming, Hisham Noemi. Are there any comments from the, oh, excuse me, I'm reading ahead of myself. Hisham, please join us.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, and good evening, committee members. It's good to see everybody in these unprecedented times. I will be giving you an update on what the board approved on May 20th to prepare us for COVID-19. Since, as Brian mentioned, nobody really knows at this time how bad things could get. So the board adopted several actions to prepare us for the worst case scenario. My focus here, while Brian's focus was on this year, this fiscal year budget and next year budget, my focus here and the focus of the authority is not just the next couple of years, but to make sure that we look out 14 years through the end of Measure J in 2034. We want to make sure our Measure J expenditures don't exceed our revenues when the measure expires. And we want to make sure that we continue to have a positive cash flow as we get there. So I have a few slides to share with you. I hope everybody can see my screen. Just as a background, some of you may be not familiar with Measure J. So when the voters approved Measure J in 2004, there was an assumption made on how much revenue the measure would generate. Based on that revenue assumption, the expenditure plan, which you see a picture of in this slide, assigned funding to specific capital projects and specific programs. The plan, unfortunately, did not have a contingency line item for downturns in the economy like the one we experienced in 2008, which took a good bite of our revenues and what we're experiencing now with COVID-19. The programs in the expenditure plan, as most of you know, are mostly operational in nature, like the return to source money that the cities use to maintain streets or the money that goes to the bus operators and so on. These programs get a fixed percentage of our revenues each year, although the amounts fluctuate from year to year based on what we actually collect. The percentage is fixed. So the return to source money is fixed at 18%. The transit operators get 5% of what we collect each year, and so on. Overall, 57.5% of our revenues go to the programs. The remaining 42.5% of our revenues go to specific capital projects. That 42.5% not only pays for the projects, it also pays for the debt service on the bonds we issued to accelerate the projects, the issuance cost for these bonds, as well as our program management costs. As you know, just like Measure C before, the authority took the strategy of accelerating project delivery in Measure J. We issued bond against our project portion of our revenues, or the 42.5%. And that allowed us to build projects sooner at a lower cost. We were able to take advantage of low bid climate during the 2008 recession, also low interest rates on bonds, and also infusion of state and federal money like Proposition 1B and stimulus funds, which helped basically offset some of the impacts of the 2008 recession. So to ensure that our project expenditure and the debt service cost stay within that 42.5% of our revenues, every couple of years we update our strategic plan. We do that update more often if we need to. Like what we're experiencing now, we'll probably be updating the strategic plan every year. In that update, we carefully look at our revenue projections, what we were thinking the revenues will look like for the next 14, 15 years, as well as our debt service costs on the issued bonds to see if we're still on track or we need to make adjustments. When revenues come in below projections, which doesn't happen very often, we deprogram funding from future projects so we can stay within the 42.5% limit and not impact the program. However, as we deliver our projects, and the list of the future projects gets shorter and shorter, our ability to deprogram funds from future projects becomes more limited, as you will see in the next couple of slides. So about 7 months ago, our board approved the 2019 Measure J strategic plan. That was in September 2019. And in that update, we reduced the revenue forecast, as you can see in this chart, in anticipation of a slowdown in the economy. We reduced our overall revenues by $136 million through the end of the measure. And we deprogrammed about $96 million in projects funding. Despite our best efforts, it appears that COVID-19 will have a larger hit on our revenue than what we thought. And as you can see in the chart, you know, the solid line is the actual line based on the mid-year budget that Brian just talked about. And we don't know where that line is going to go from here. Is it going to continue to go down for a year or two? Or are we going to have a V-shaped recovery and we'll go back up to the original forecast? We just don't know. Since nobody knows, the board basically wants us to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Our revenue reductions could be between $30 million if we get a V-shaped recovery, or they could be as much as $300 million if the recovery takes time to come back, basically. As you can, this slide shows you the status of the Measure J capital projects delivery in the 2019 strategic plan. After we adjusted for the lower revenues, we had a total of $754 million in Measure J program to capital projects. And as you can see in the chart, by the end of this fiscal year, we anticipate spending 96% of the $754 million. That leaves about $30 million to be expended over the next 14 years. Not much, but that was the plan all along, is to advance the delivery of the project to give the public earlier benefits of these projects. Out of the $30 million that's left, there is about $20 million for projects that have not yet started. By deprogramming funds to these projects, we should be able to take about $47 million hit to our overall revenues without impacting our commitments to ongoing projects or Measure J programs. Anything beyond that basically will most likely we'll have to look at our existing commitments to see where we can cut. So we took several actions in Resolution 2009P, which was adopted by the board on May 20th, as shown in the next slide. And the first action is to suspend all new appropriations. This applies to capital projects programmed in the strategic plan, as well as projects programmed in the TLC and the PIDBIKE programming documents approved by the board. We just cannot approve any new appropriations at this time until we have a new revenue forecast. We can make exceptions on a case-by-case basis if, for example, the sponsor demonstrates potential loss of other fund sources, but these exceptions will be very limited. By doing this, not only we will be able to preserve our remaining Measure J funds and not overcommit or overprogram, but also will allow us to build a shelf of ready projects in case we get stimulus funds from the feds. Any projects we delay can be on our priority list to fund from stimulus funding. And by the way, this action does not apply to operational programs like the return to source or the bus operations. The authority will continue to allocate funds to the programs. The second action is related to project savings. We anticipate between $4 and $5 million in savings at this time on projects that are nearing completion, such as the 680 southbound express lane completion, or the Highway 4 East widening, or the Caldecott Tunnel landscaping. And these savings will be kept in a reserve and not reprogrammed to other projects. basically having that reserve will help us cushion the impact of COVID-19 without having to take funding from projects. And the third action is something we're already doing. You know, many of the Measure J operational programs like bus service and school bus programs, they receive their funding at the beginning of the fiscal year before we actually know what our actual revenues are for that year. So to avoid over allocation, we keep 10% of the allocation until the end of the fiscal year when we do a true-up payment at the end of the fiscal year. The board approved allocating this time only 6 months at a time, rather than allocating a full year at the beginning of the fiscal year. This way, we can be sure that we're not going to be over allocating our funds, since we still don't know where the bottom is in terms of our revenues. The fourth action is something the board already agreed to do in the 2019 strategic plan, which is to delay issuing the next call for projects for the TLC and the bike programs. Just like what happened in 2008, where we had to defund East County share of the TLC program to keep our commitments on Highway 4 and EBART, we may need to do the same in the future to avoid impacting the other operational programs like Return to Source and the bus operations. And by doing that, we can probably absorb another $50 to $70 million hit to our revenues without having to impact other programs. The last action is meant to help us maintain positive cash flow, as we have several projects funded by federal and state funds, like Brian mentioned. We will be submitting reimbursement requests monthly as opposed to every 2 to 3 months in order to reduce the amount of Measure J we have to front on these projects. Besides these actions, staff is also working actively with our partners to help reduce demand on our Measure J funds. That includes asking the feds for reduced matched requirements on grants we already received. For example, we received a $7.5 million grant, ADS grant, Autonomous Driving System grant, from FTA, and we asked them to make the costs that we incur before they complete their pre-award audit eligible for reimbursement. I'm glad to say they agreed to do that, and that saved us about $765,000 in Measure J funds. We're also monitoring opportunities to reduce interest costs on issued bonds, whether it's through refinancing or other ways. And we're looking for ways to use other fund sources to supplant our Measure J funds on different projects or programs. For example, if WETA agrees to use RM3 money for the Richmond Ferry operations for the next couple years, and instead of using our Measure J money, it will greatly help our cash flow. Measure J pays about $3 to $4 million a year for ferry operations. If we can delay paying that for 2 more years or 3 more years, that will help our cash flow significantly. Of course, the whole thing is dependent on settling the litigation against RM3. Staff at the meeting on May 20th also asked the board to authorize us to begin work on a couple of items in light of COVID-19. The first one is the development of an allocation plan that looks at all of our existing contracts and appropriations to see if they can be terminated, suspended, or reduced. The goal here is to plan for deeper reductions to our revenues until we have a better forecast. In the process of developing the allocation plan, we'll end up prioritizing these contracts and appropriations, which will feed into our next strategic plan update, but also will become our priority list for funding from other fund sources like stimulus funding. If we cannot meet our commitments, the commitments we made to the city and the sponsors, from Measure J, we're gonna look for other ways to meet it, for other fund sources to meet it. And then the second item we asked authorization to look into is to develop a fund exchange program. And this is also in light of not having a new sales tax measure. As you know, it takes money to get money. For example, federal funds require generally 20% match, and some of the programs in Senate bill require 30% match, or some of them even 100% match, like the local partnership program. Without having the matching funds from a new measure, we don't have a chance to even compete for some of these programs. So we're looking for possible options to help us get matching funds. One idea is to loan our STIP money to other counties in exchange for their flexible local money. As you know, STIP money is very restrictive. We don't always have the ability to use it as a match. Local funds, on the other hand, are not, and they're very flexible, and they can be used on any project. So this is an idea we're looking at, and for it to work, I mean, many things need to fall in place at the right time. So we'll be looking at that. The other option is to consolidate our STIP funds on a single project rather than have it programmed for multiple projects. Right now, we have $20 million in existing STIP funds that's programmed to 3 major projects on the state highway system that each one of them has about $70 million in funding shortfall. So focusing that $20 million on one project will help us advance it to become shovel ready and hopefully have the matching funds to get construction money. We'll also be looking for a way to build a shelf of shovel-ready projects that can take advantage of stimulus funds. As you know, stimulus funds, whenever we get it, there will be very short fuse on it. They will be wanting to fund, projects that can start construction within 6 months based on our earlier experience. So if a sponsor, a city, comes and requests Measure J funds to start construction, we might be better off putting that request on hold for a few months until we know what happens with the stimulus bill, since that project could be basically an ideal candidate since it's shovel ready. We will have to evaluate each case carefully to ensure that we're not putting other funds the project may have at risk. So that these are some of the ideas we're thinking about to deal with COVID-19. You're probably asking, well, which projects are going to be impacted? And the next 3 slides, this is not an exhaustive list. I know we're missing a few projects from that list, so we'll be adding them later. But this slide shows the projects that are programmed in our strategic plan before fiscal year 26 and are programmed in the TLC and the PID-BITE programs. All of these projects, what's common between them is they all need Measure J appropriations in the future. And that money, as you know, is now at risk because of the revenue reduction. So we will be, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at each project individually, working with the project sponsor, and basically putting these projects in priority order. If the revenue forecast is not as bad as we thought, and we have the capacity to make appropriations to some of these projects, then we will go through this list, through that ranking order that we developed. If the forecast is really bad, we cannot afford to allocate any money to any of these projects, then this list will serve as our priority list for funding from other fund sources like stimulus funds. And these are the list, and I'll make a copy of the presentation available after the meeting. And the way we plan to prioritize these lists, this is what we're thinking at this time. We want to basically prioritize allocations to projects that leverage state or federal money that cannot be delayed. So we don't want to really lose any state or federal money because we couldn't come up with ours. Also, projects that could lose funding because a match was required, and now we're taking away the match. And shovel-ready projects always go to the top of the list. And that's the correct. And also, if a project can prove that if it doesn't get constructed, a larger project will be at risk, then that also will play in our priority list. This is not the final criteria, but this is the initial one we were thinking about. We will be basically taking the criteria and the allocation plan to our board. I think it's going to be in July, since we probably need to go through TCC in June to basically approve it for future actions. And again, as I said, the action will depend on what the revenue forecast will look like. If it's really bad, there will be no future appropriations, but the list will serve as our priority list for funding from other fund sources like stimulus funds. If the forecast is not as bad, then we may have the capacity to fund some of these projects. I can tell you for now that we'll probably, unless we have a V-shaped recovery that puts us at a much higher level than what we're collecting now, that we will end up not funding some of these projects. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions, and my apology for the lengthy presentation.
That person was right.
So do we have any questions? We have a set of raised hands. Go ahead.
May I see the screen before the draft allocation plan? There was a second set of lists of projects that may not be funded, and I went by so fast I couldn't quite see. How do I unmute?
Hisham, you are unmuted. I think Hisham is still pulling up that list for the last page of our...
Yeah, sorry about that. I will get that up in a second. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
For some reason, I'm not able to move the slide. Let me try again. Is this the slide you're looking at? I'm sorry, which slide you wanted to see?
Next one. Oh, freeze. Okay, okay. Can I get a copy of this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, we will send it after the meeting. I'll send it to Fifi to send it to all of you.
Do we have any members of the public on the call? If you guys want to make a comment or would like to speak, you can raise your hand. You can press *9 if you are on the phone call. And same goes for our committee members. Do we have other questions?
I don't see any hands raised, Vice Chair.
Thank you. I have a question. Hisham, when you said, I don't know the terms about this, you said that there are certain funds, maybe several $1 million from each county that could be deprogrammed. Can you expand on that a teeny bit, if possible?
Yes. Basically, right now we have $20 million in STIP funds programmed on 3 projects in our county, 3 state highway projects. Each one of them has a large shortfall that on our own we cannot fund unless we compete for other fund sources like federal funds or state funds. So let's say one of the counties, need the money now, and they'll be able to pay us like 2 years from now using tolls they're collecting on a tollway or an expressway. Then we can give them, for example, some of that $20 million, and they'll give it back to us in 2 years, as long as we get it back. I mean, that's going to be the trick. We need assurances that we will get it back. The money we get back now is considered local money. It will not have any restrictions on it. And the board can decide to use it on the project where they took the STIP funds from, or they can use it on any projects where they think they have a better chance of competing for state or federal money. We will build that basically match cash balance that we need to compete. So that's the idea. For it to work, I mean, a county or a CMA or a city basically have to have like a federalized projects already. They need to be basically short on funds now, but they will need to be sure that 2 years from now they will have that funds from another source like tolls. They'll use the funds now to build a toll road or an express lane. 2 years from now, the project will be operational and they'll be collecting tolls and they will pay us back from that tolls. Of course, we will have to get assurances that we will be paid back in case the project gets delayed or something. So that will be on the other partner to secure that.
One thing, one of the gentlemen, he's has a hand up. I'd like to call on him. Go ahead.
Is it me, Ed Miller?
Yes, it is Ed Miller. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Thanks, Zane. Hey, yeah, just a quick question. I understand, and this is some creative thinking. Is there? I mean, when we received the STIP funds ourselves, it had a certain color on the money, and I know you're going to say yes, and it's all been thought through, but is there a legal risk of changing the color of this money? If we give the STIP funds to one of these organizations, then is it possible we're violating the agreements that we made to receive it?
No, I mean, we will basically, this has been done before through other projects. So we will be basically deprogramming the STIP funds from our project and programming it on a project in a different jurisdiction. That's really where it is. And that, of course, that project needs to be eligible for STIP funds. So it has to be a capital transportation improvement project. In terms of legality, that's where it comes in. It has to be eligible. Whatever we program it to, it has to be a project that's eligible for the STIP funds. That's a good question.
I apologize for my, lack of experience with the sort of thing, but thank you for the courteous explanation.
Sure. Isham, one more question. You said that there had been some deprogramming of funds in East County in the previous years during the recession. Just curious about that, how that worked out. And
yeah, that's a very good question, actually. I mean, before Measure J started in 2008, as you know, in 2009, we had the Great Recession in 2008, and we had multiple projects ready. We basically competed for Proposition 1B money for Highway 4, where as a condition of getting that funding, we had to commit our Measure J money. And that was no problem before the recession, we had enough. But also, besides that, East County had the ECRFA funds, the developer fees, and they also committed some of it to the project. So when the recession hit, the housing market basically collapsed, and those developer fees that we were counting on disappeared. So rather than give our money back, our Proposition 1B money back on Howie 4, we basically worked with East County to defund their portion of the TLC program, as well as actually some of the other categories, like their major streets category in the strategic plan and the BART access category. So we have enough money to meet our commitments on that project. Now, things improved, so we were able to do that. The projects got built and the revenue projections improved in the future. So we were able to restore funding to some level to these categories. Unfortunately, now with COVID-19, we're gonna have to go back and defund them again. So that's what happened then. You're basically, you would consider the TLC and the PED bike program as capital projects. And then you basically will cap them at 0%. So defund them in essence. So you can take that money and use it on delivering the other projects.
Do we have anybody else?
We don't have any hands up.
Okay, I hate to bother you. One last question. So understanding that with COVID-19, small portion or maybe a larger portion of society has been working from home and has been allowed to work permanently. Have we looked into our priority list, looking into going back to all the cities and going back to all the deprogramming and telling them that if we do get shovel-ready programs, shovel-ready projects, such as things that are more local, like last mile, things that would not be affected by COVID-19, have we asked them that maybe they could adjust around that? That way, when we do focus on shovel-ready, it takes into account COVID-19 changes, which maybe people are less on board, maybe they're driving more locally, maybe they're working from home. I'm not sure what the studies will say, but I'm sure it's going to be a mode shift. So I'm just curious that when that program policy goes into place of deprogramming or reprogramming, how much are we going to take into account that some of our ideas maybe a few years ago that we thought were great may not be the same thing?
Excellent point. And I think once we develop our allocation plan, we're gonna try to deal with it in two ways. One, we're gonna ask the cities if they have multiple projects to be cut, what is their top priority to be moved? And you know, we're hoping they're thinking about the same thing you're mentioning, that PED bike, you know, last mile projects have a higher priority over some other projects they may have, like widening. But the other part where we will address is when we come up with our allocation plan and present it to the board. I mean, the board may decide that to give higher priority, regardless of what we found out, to PED and bike type of projects, making that one of the criteria that you see on the screen. Let me. It's the last one right here. So we can add like a final bullet to this list that says TLC or bike projects should have a higher priority over other type of projects. So that's how I think we can address it. We will, of course, talk it through with the cities and the TCC and, you know, present it to the board to see what they say. But it's, yeah, COVID-19 is going to change a lot of things for good.
Sham, thank you so much. Thank you. Good luck with what you're working on. And
Thank you,
if
sir.
I'll would like to move on. And anybody?
Vice Chair, I think you're muted. If you want to unmute yourself, please.
I'm
Did we
trying to
just lose-
unmute the vice chair. Let's see. I'm going to unmute everybody.
Can anybody hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can, yes.
Okay. So we're going to be moving on to the GMP task force to implement SB 743. That's going to be presented by our very own senior transportation planner, Matt Kelly. If there are any public comments or from the committee, please raise your hand. And if you're from the public and would like to speak, please also raise your hand or press *9. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Hopefully everybody can see my screen. And what I'm going to be presenting tonight, is what the Growth Management Program Task Force has been doing for about the last 6 months. As you may or may not know, well, most of you probably know, the checklist that you review in order to give the cities their return to source funding is really the checklist is making sure they are compliant with the Growth Management Program. The Growth Management Program, a lot of CEQA is documented in the Growth Management Program. And there have been changes to CEQA through change in California state law over the last few years that have changed the way transportation is analyzed in CEQA. And that has been memorialized in our Growth Management Program. So now we are going through and trying to reflect the changes in state law, environmental law, into our Growth Management Program. So I'm just going to walk you through what the task force has been up to for the last 6 months and the proposed policy that they've developed. So let's move through here. Okay, so we did a series of meetings back in 2019 with all the planning directors from the 19 cities in the county, basically to ask them what they felt they needed to implement these changes to CEQA under SB 743 locally, as well as how we should address it in the Growth Management Program. That helped us develop our work plan for the task force. And starting in October, we've had 7 meetings to date. And this is mostly city staff, local agency staff, the transit agencies, and other stakeholders. And we've had about 15 to 20 members at each meeting. What they are seeking to do is apply a consistent philosophy across the county to this new CEQA requirement. So where the way GMP treated the old requirements, we want it to treat the new requirements. Those old requirements were level of service as the way to analyze transportation. I'll be telling you about vehicle miles traveled, which is the new measure. So, and one of the major outcomes would be a set of guidance for local jurisdictions on how they could implement locally. MTSOs, which are our multimodal transportation service objectives. Those are our performance metrics that are in our action plans. And a lot of those today are level of service, so we want to change those. And then changes to the Growth Management Program procedures, which is what our local jurisdictions use every day. Next slide. Okay, so a little bit about SB 743 and what it affects. So it was passed with the intent of promoting development in infill locations, so not in green fields, but in existing locations, especially around transit centers. It was meant to promote public health through promoting active transportation, biking, walking, taking transit. And then that would lead to the reduction of greenhouse gases, which is the state has as an overarching goal. What it changes in CEQA is it eliminates vehicle delay as a measure of significance. And that's that level of service impact. That is looking at how long vehicles sit at intersections. That's no longer a measure. The new measure is vehicle miles traveled. So instead of looking at a new development and how much it impacts a particular intersection, it will look at how many miles of travel it adds to the overall system. So in terms of how long we've been looking at this as transportation and land use practitioners, it was passed back in September of 2013. And for about the last 5 or 6 years, we've been commenting on the guideline development and then figuring out how to implement it locally. And it is required to be implemented by local agencies starting this July 1st. So what local agencies need to do, and that's any lead agency, and that's generally your local jurisdictions, the cities you're representing, they need to establish guidelines on how a new project, and when I talk about project, I'm talking about a local land use development project. So a new retail, a shopping center, an office building, or a new apartment building. So when those projects come across a new city's planning desk, they need to establish guidelines for how to measure the VMT coming from that new development and come up with a methodology for computing that. And then they need to define thresholds. They can define thresholds that screen out certain projects. Certain projects will no longer have to go through this, this transportation analysis. And then what constitutes a significant VMT impact under CEQA? And then what types of mitigation measures can cities use to reduce the amount of VMT being produced by a particular development? So really, what is VMT and how do you measure it or express it? So VMT technically is every mile every person travels throughout the day in a vehicle. But when you're looking at a project, you don't want to look at every mile generated. You want to look at VMT generated by an individual, so per capita, and then you want to look at the type of development. So the little picture here on the left is total VMT. That is every mile that I would travel leaving my house or going anywhere throughout the day, whether I'm leaving my house and going to work or to the gas station or from the office to the coffee shop and back. So that could equal 29 miles. It certainly isn't today. I don't have any VMT under my belt today, as probably most of you don't. But we're looking at normal times here. So when we're looking at a new residential development, we want to look at the VMT that new residence is generating. So here's the new residential location in the middle. That's developing or generating VMT that's going to the gas station and to the store and back, and then to from home to the coffee shop, and then from work back to home. So that might only be 16 out of those 29 miles. And then when you're looking at a retail type development, something that's attracting trips, you want to just look at those trips that are being attracted to that new location. Say a new office building goes in downtown Concord. You want to look at the average trip going to that new office location, and that very well may be 11 miles. So it's a lower number than that 29 VMT that one may generate in a day. So I go to the next slide. So then you look at mitigation. You know what the project is generating. Then you want to start reducing the VMT. Can you change the built environment? That is, can you adjust the land use? Can you add uses to the mix? If it's a residential building, can you add some retail? Can you add a a grocery store on the ground floor? Can you add a cleaner? So that may reduce some of the trips people may leave in a car to make. They may stay within the development. Can you move the location from a mile away from a transit site to next to a BART station? That is going to significantly reduce the amount of VMT generated by that development. And then can you look at transportation demand management? We do that today, but can you really look at it as a way of mitigating the number of trips or the VMT? And that can be by providing a car share program at the new development. It could be providing transit passes to all new employees coming to the development. And then we could, but those are good and effective, but then you need to monitor those, and the locals would be required to monitor them in order to quantify the amount of VMT being reduced. Then we look at regional types of mitigation. So new types of impact fees that are looking at the number of miles generated as opposed to the number of trips generated like they are today. And then there's looking at a more regional level, a mitigation bank or exchange. So where we currently have cap and trade statewide, could cities who are having a tough time getting a low VMT development in, can they approve the development and pay into a mitigation bank and be able to approve that development and allow for a larger mitigation to occur someplace else, like, you know, a new transit line, something like that, that's really going to have a lot of bang for the buck. So what the task force has done is that they have agreed that these VMT thresholds that should be regionally consistent, but should also take local conditions into account. And you'll see how we're doing that in just a minute. There should be a consistent way of measuring VMT across the county, just like we measure VMT we measure LOS across the county today. And then folks thought there is value in retaining LOS analysis locally. You need to know how to time your traffic signals after a new development comes in. So we want cities to be able to retain that use. They just can't use it in CEQA. So then how do we mitigate VMT impacts in adjacent jurisdiction? That's what the action plans look at. How do you affect what your upstream and downstream neighbors are doing, and how can you avoid impacting your neighbors adversely? And then how to do this in suburban or rural locations that may not have as much transit as in Walnut Creek or in Richmond. So then you want to consider, they want to consider transportation demand management and congestion pricing as potential VMT mitigation measures. And then that idea of the mitigation bank, there was a lot of interest in that from the task force. And then the cities want to know what types of projects can be eliminated from this assessment, from this new VMT measure in CEQA. So any projects that are going into a transit priority area, basically within a half mile of transit, would be exempted from the assessment. So would small types of projects. And then projects that are locating in low VMT generating areas, and I'll show you what those are in just a second. Anything going into a low VMT generating area is presumed to also be a low VMT generating project. And then local serving retail or schools need to be looked at differently. And then types of transportation projects that aren't presumed to increase VMT, like a bike project, a pedestrian project, or a transit project. And then what we define as a VMT impact, or a significant VMT impact. And that we're going along with the state's definition of 15% below the regional average, where we do have some flexibilities on the definition of regional. And I'm going to talk about that right now. So here's where I say the rubber meets the road. This is each jurisdiction in Contra Costa's existing VMT. So the blue bar is the city's VMT per capita for home-based type development. So when you're looking at a residential development, this is what you would look at. This is what's coming out of the home. So I'm going to go all the way over here to the left for Richmond. Richmond currently produces about 12 or 13, about 11 or 12 VMT per capita. That is currently below both the regional average, which is the county average, which is the green line, and the Bay Area regional average, which is the red line. Then that threshold we talked about, that what signifies significance, is 15% below that regional average. So here's dashed line is 15% below county and 15% below the Bay Area region. For home-based trips, we are choosing the county average, the green. So that's the higher bar. And it's also what most home-based trips, they're more local in nature. They're not regional in nature. So these West County jurisdictions would basically, these three right here that I'm pointing at, and probably Pinole, would be able to screen their residential projects out from the VMT analysis in CEQA, whereas jurisdictions over here in, say, Oakley, Brentwood, and Antioch would actually have to do that additional analysis. And then it's a mixed bag in other parts of the county. But what they would be required to do over here is, if they already have a high VMT, they would need to reduce, in order to approve the project, they would need to reduce the project's VMT down to either 15% below the county average or 15% below their jurisdictional average. So for Oakley, that would be somewhere right around here and not all the way down here. So they still have some work to do, but we wanted to give them a higher bar so they didn't have to reduce all the way down here or down to here. So now we're going to look at a similar chart, but this is for those non-residential developments, the commercial developments. And here things are kind of flipped. Over here in East County, they currently have people driving to jobs in East County right now are not coming from very far away, because there aren't a lot of high-paying jobs currently in East County. What that does give them is the opportunity to develop new workplace developments, new commercial developments. The developers may be more willing to come in here because they don't have to go through the additional VMT analysis, and they are screened out and can build commercial type developments. Whereas folks in Orinda and Moraga may have a harder time approving commercial based developments, but they don't currently do that many. But we still give them the option of mitigating down to 15% below the regional average. And for here, we picked the Bay Area region, the red, because it is slightly higher and gives folks a slightly higher bar to meet, or lower bar in this circumstance. So the VMT policy in draft form, as proposed by the task force, is to define how different types of projects are analyzed, how certain types of projects can be screened out from that analysis, and then the levels of mitigation that need to be mitigated down to in order for projects to be approved. And then what types of mitigations can be used to reduce those VMT impacts. So that is where we stand. I'll just go back here. We've taken this draft policy to the board for their initial consideration. We're now taking it to you and to others, and taking it around the county to the regional transportation planning committees. We'll bring it back to the board in July for their adoption. And that's what's discussed here. What we're doing, we're making educational presentations available to city councils, so local staff can educate their council on what's happening. And then we've got a couple of other tasks that the group is working on, and we've got 2 more meetings to cover those. So I really apologize for taking up so much of your evening, but I can take any questions or comments if you have them at this time. And I just want to, tell you, for those of us in transportation and land use, this is a really big change. That's why we've brought the task force together. For most folks, they may not see a change in what's going on at City Hall, but behind the scenes, there is a big change. So that's why we wanted you to know about it. And it does have some impacts on the growth management program and the checklists for future checklist approvals, not the current approvals.
Ed, I saw a hand up from you.
Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Matt, I got to tell you, this is actually this is the most exciting information I've seen all evening, and I'm going to draw some incredibly loose comparisons here, but I mean, I'd say of all the everybody's got sort of their thing they pound the table on in this committee, and for me it's always been about the problem with the big buildup of suburban housing out here and all of the VMT that gets generated for the urban work centers that comes from, in other words, and there's never been a metric there's never been a clearer metric than this, I think, to disincentivize that kind of construction. If this sort of metric, the loose comparison I was going to make was not one that I really like, but cap and trade and the whole carbon credit trading. It's not really that, but the loose comparison comes from the fact that if these VMTs show up very strongly, they would raise the bar of effort and/or monies committed to offset impact by developers in areas that would generate these VMTs. The only thing that that it was hard to quantify or picture from the metrics, which were very interesting and useful, but it's hard to tell how many VMT miles maybe are generated for a project that's outside the community. Like if there was another Oracle or something going in Pleasanton, how might that cause vehicle miles from our region or other surrounding counties? I did see your adjacent jurisdictions. Anyway, the point is, I think these large workforce places are gonna get a lot more scrutiny, and there's gonna be a higher bar for some of this commercial construction. And this could push some commercial construction out into the outlying areas, which is what I've been thinking is going to solve most of our problems anyway, although COVID may solve a lot of them with remote workage. But all right, and I appreciate you giving me the time and recognition. Thank you for that.
Good points, Member Miller. And just so you know, any analysis, say of a job office park in Pleasanton, they have to analyze the entire travel shed of that development. So if someone's coming from Sacramento, they need to analyze every potential employee coming to that location. So hopefully, and what you said about getting, hopefully pushing development out into these underserved areas, at least job-wise, we hope that will be
right. If it incentivizes developers to develop commercially out there because there will be fewer hoops to jump through, that would be a great thing. Certainly.
Exactly.
Looks like anything else. Do we have?
Hi, this is Claire asking. Is there a way to check or you spoke to it briefly. Is there a way to make sure that the development, is following the checklist? Sort of ongoing, making sure that the mitigation efforts are working?
Yeah, so I mean, well, that's a good point. The monitoring of the actual mitigations. So we will be putting together a tool that our local jurisdictions can use that they will use to quantify the reductions based on the mitigations they apply to a development. So yeah, so we will be seeking to quantify that going forward, and then as part of the checklist requirements, cities have to report out that they are doing that analysis.
Thanks.
Anybody else? So I have just one last thing to add. Are there, Mr. Kelly, are there ways in, say we might see a development and it might be impacted by this, and it would have a economic development benefit, but there might be too much burden because of this new way of mitigation? Are there certain waivers where certain companies who bring a further economic development to maybe a portion, let's say they come to Lafayette or Moraga or Walnut Creek, where they have to meet some of these requirements, but they're not able to meet all, to make sure that we don't lose the development itself, as far as like office park or business or something? Are there waivers or mechanisms or appeals or guidelines?
Great question. The one part of the policy I left out, and I really should add it back to my slides, is that we have allowed for a findings of overriding consideration under the policy. So if a unique type of development comes forward that maybe doesn't meet, we're going to identify these types of situations, hospitals, things like that, that don't meet a normal residential or commercial template in terms of analyzing the VMT, that we give jurisdictions the option to, opt out, but they have to provide the evidence that and the rationale for opting out and finding those findings of overriding consideration. It's not just they can say, well, we want this to happen, so we're gonna, opt out of the policy. They actually have to provide us with evidence that it will be doing the things they say it will be doing, that would, and their rationale for actually approving it. So yes, there is a mechanism there, but we hope that it will be a lightly used mechanism.
Matt, just adding on a little bit more, I could see the one thing also that I was thinking about during this was that the metrics generated from this may directly sort of come in conflict with incentives that are coming out of the state at the state level, in the sense of, and again, I apologize for the broad strokes here, but the one that comes to mind is a lot of the acceleration of high density development at the state level, right? That would be in direct, in many cases, in many cases, the incentive from the state would be in direct competition with the disincentive from the VMTs that would be generated.
Yeah, so one of our board members asked a very similar question. There are several other state requirements that are in direct conflict with this. Their general plan guidelines, their congestion management program, and potentially with RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And so we've been asked by our board to actually prepare a letter to MTC to make sure that the local RHNA, the housing allocation effort, takes this SB 743 into consideration, because jurisdictions are required to plan for housing, but if they can't approve the development, then how are they going to meet that requirement? So
I know this is arrogant.
Point.
I know this is arrogant, but I actually think that it should be the other way around. It's almost like the housing allotment process should be taking the VMTs. It's more like they should actually be considering this more if they want smart development.
I may use that in our letter, member.
Thank you all, and if we don't have any other questions or committee from the committee or the public, if you can confirm that. If you don't have any hands up.
I don't see any hands.
So the next item on the agenda is the Compliance Checklist Primer, GMP. It's a growth management program, and that's going to be coming also from Matt Kelly. And let's take a look.
Let me grab the right PowerPoint here. Hold on just a second. Let's close that. My apologies here. Let's see. Okay. So this is something we do every 2 years at the beginning of checklist season. We have officially entered checklist season. And I apologize to those of you who are experts and have reviewed dozens of checklists, and feel free to turn off your camera and enjoy your dinner. But I'll just walk through this, and this is a refresher for those who have seen it before, but it's really geared for those new folks who haven't seen a checklist before, or maybe only saw a few checklists last year. I'm anticipating 2 checklists next month. So that's why we're bringing this to you tonight, so you know what you're looking at when you get a checklist in your packet. So basically, the growth management program was first established, and I'm going to try and go through this relatively quick because I know we're getting a little late on time. So it was first established under Measure C and then strengthened under Measure J. And basically what it looks to do is assure that new development, what we just talked about, pays for the facilities required to meet the demand due to growth. So it's looking at infrastructure, transportation mainly, but also sewer, water, fire, police, all those kinds of things that are required to be extended out as new development comes in. Requires neighboring jurisdictions to cooperate when approving projects, so that goes back to that last item as well, and to support land use patterns that make our existing transportation system more effective and efficient, and support infill development in existing areas. All those kind of go back to what we just talked about. So you can see why we're going to have to amend the growth management program to reflect that change in CEQA. So one main portion of the growth management program is the action plan, and the first item you'll see on your checklist. The action plans apply performance metrics to major arterials, to transit lines, and to our major multimodal trails around the county through those MTSOs that I mentioned earlier. New developments must mitigate any impacts to those MTSOs. So before, if it was level of service at an intersection, a new development came in Concord that impacted Pleasant Hills MTSOs, the developer has to mitigate that. Now the MTSOs will just look a little different. Requires jurisdictions to work together when planning for growth, and protects those neighbors from upstream development. So when you're looking at the action plan item in the checklist, what you're looking for is what have they done to implement the action plans on their regional routes. There should be a list of things they've done. They've built this bike lane, or they've added a turn lane here. Each route has a list of actions, and the jurisdiction just has to list what they've done. Have they circulated environmental documents to their neighbors? Have they analyzed impacts of new amendments? And that's basically new projects that aren't already in their general plans. And have they approved projects consistent with what's in the action plan? And then there's a procedure they have to go through whenever they're amending their GPA. And that's mostly about notifying their their upstream and downstream neighbors. So there's 3 things they have to show that they've done in order to meet that first checklist requirement. And sorry, these are in your packet, but these are just examples of what each of those could look like. Here's what we did. Here's what we did to notify our neighbors. And sorry, I'm jumping on. Sorry, the top of my screen is covered, so I can't see which slide I'm on. Anyway, we're on checklist item number 2. This is the development mitigation program. Each jurisdiction is required to have a local and regional fee program to mitigate local development. So when developments come in, they're required to pay into a local fee program for each new unit of development or the square footage of the commercial development. So here's what they're required to have, a mitigation fee program. You can see what the rates are per type of development. And basically they just have to affirm that they are, that they do pay into a regional and local fee program. Now we are on number 3 on the checklist. That's housing options. We used to look at job opportunities, but we didn't really change the name of the item, so it really does focus on housing. And here they have to attach their state housing and community development progress report. So what have they done to institute their local RHNA? And that's what Member Miller was getting at earlier. And what sorts of policies do they have for new developments in terms of getting transit, biking, and walking access into those new developments? And here's what those reports look like. You're probably used to seeing these. You should see tables A and B from the state housing progress reports in each of your checklists. This is a state requirement, so all we're doing is asking that affirming that they met their state requirement and providing evidence of that. Okay, next checklist item is traffic impact studies. So when they've got a new development that generates a certain level of trips, what did they do? Did they circulate these studies to their neighboring jurisdictions? That's how Walnut Creek knows what Concord is doing. It's how Pinole knows what Hercules is doing. And Oakley knows what Brentwood is doing. So what they're required to do is tell you through the checklist what they've approved and the circulation process that they went through. Did they notify neighboring jurisdictions, and did they circulate the traffic impact study to those jurisdictions? Next, did they participate in cooperative multi-jurisdictional planning? This is basically participating in the sub-regional planning committee meetings, and did they update and implement their action plans? So really they're just affirming that they did what they're required to do under the growth management program in terms of participating with their neighbors through the RTPCs. Next is the 5-year capital improvement program, a CIP. Every jurisdiction is required to adopt a CIP and include that, at least the transportation component, in their checklist. So you'll either see the full CIP in your checklist, or you'll see a link to it. Sometimes they're hundreds of pages. So when we have a really big checklist packet, it's usually because a city included their entire CIP. And this is just a sample of what that may look like. Basically, it's a page for every transportation project that the city has in their funding program. Next is Transportation Systems Management. This is also known as TDM, the Transportation Demand Management. This requires that every jurisdiction has an ordinance or resolution in place that promotes alternatives to the single occupant vehicle, and that's usually in developments, whether it be a office development or a housing development. And they are required to submit that with their checklist. And this is what an ordinance may look like. Next, and what this is probably the most important change that happened with Measure J to the GMP, is that the urban limit line was enacted. So each jurisdiction, including the county, needs to adopt an urban limit line. And the jurisdictions can either adopt the counties or come up with one of their own. And here is what the urban limit lines look like, kind of in pink. And those are the cities. The counties' urban limit line includes these green areas. And so basically, all new development must take place inside these areas unless the voters go and change the urban limit line. That's the only way these lines can actually change. And so jurisdictions are required through the checklist to tell us if they've had any changes to their urban limit line. If not, we assume they still look like this. And here's the language in the checklist. Growth management element. So every general plan in every jurisdiction has to have a growth management element. What we require is that their growth management element is consistent with the model one that we developed for the growth management program. So all jurisdictions currently have one in place that is consistent. They're required to let us know anytime that it's updated. And really, they just send us the element from their general plan. Posting of signs. This is what jurisdictions are required to do when they have a project that is funded by Measure J. All those projects that Hisham talked about a couple items ago. If you've got a project that costs more than $250,000, you better have a sign up with our big CCTA logo on it saying Measure J funded this project. We can't advertise as an agency for our sales tax measures. This is the only way we can advertise. So we require that jurisdictions post these signs. And to the right, you're seeing what a sign looked like at the fourth bore of the Caldecott Tunnel project. Your taxpayer dollars at work. That's what we want the public to know. They voted for it, they paid it, they're seeing an improvement. And we just ask that the jurisdictions let us know the projects that they use the signage at. Then there's maintenance of effort, the next item on the checklist. I think we're at item 11. This requires that Measure J isn't the sole source of funding for cities' maintenance. When you approve a checklist, you're giving them 18% of their share of Measure J so that they can do maintenance on their local roads, and there's other things they can do. They can do bike paths, bike lanes, bus stop improvements, etc. But most of it goes to repairing potholes and things like that. We want to make sure that in addition to that funding for maintenance, that they are using their own city's money funding for maintenance. So what this item is required to do is they need to tell us, well, acknowledge what the requirement is, and then let us know what they've actually spent besides the local funding. So where Brentwood's requirement is that they spend $146,000 of non-Measure J funds on local maintenance, they're doing well above their local MOE, over $700,000 each fiscal year. This is a few years ago. But really, we just want to make sure that cities aren't stopping their local funding of maintenance just because they are getting this return to source funds. And because of that, cities do continue to fund it locally. We just want to make sure they're not 100% relying on Measure J return to source funding. And then there is the LSM and improvement reporting form. This is where we ask them to acknowledge and confirm how they've spent that return to source funding that they've actually spent it and what they've actually spent it on. So we want to know how much they spent. Are they banking it? Are they spending it on potholes? Are they spending it on bike paths? Are they spending it on their own staff time spent on growth management program compliance? That's all eligible. We just want to know what it's being spent on so we can then tell the voters how this money is being spent. So here's what the forms look like. So first they're asked to provide a summary overall. Here's what we spent last year, City of Brentwood. Here's how it's spent in the different eligible categories. And then over here, if they say that they spent it on potholes, well, tell us, how many potholes did you fill? How many curb cuts, ADA curb cuts did you put in at intersections? How many pavement rehab projects did you do? And how much pavement was used? How many square feet? We want to know these types of things. It's things that if the public knows, they can get behind. They don't know where the money's going, they might not support something like this. So in addition to those 12 required items, they can tell us anything else they want under item 13, but we usually don't get anything there. So it's 12 primary items, 13 items in total, and that's what is in a checklist and what you should be looking for. But when each jurisdiction comes to present their checklist, you are certainly entitled to ask them about any one of these items or any related item. But we want you to know what you're actually supposed to be looking at so that you can ask, questions that make sense. So you're not asking them questions that they aren't, things about they aren't required to be compliant with, but you certainly can ask any question you want of the member, or of the staff member, but we want you to know exactly what they're required to submit as part of their checklist. So, you can save time when reviewing checklists, and then the number of questions might be reduced when the cities come in, but certainly feel free to ask as many questions of city staff as you like when they do come in and prepare their checklist. Because as you've seen in the past, some presentations are more thorough, let's just say, than others. So I'm gonna stop talking now and let you ask any questions or let you continue with your evening.
So do we have questions or hands up? Anybody?
I don't see any hands or any members of the public raising their hands, Vice Chair.
Okay, so if there's no more comments, and once again, let me remind the public that if they would like to speak, they can raise their hand or press *9. As Fifi has indicated, as I have seen, comments. Next is a member or staff comments. Does any committee member or staff have anything they would like to share in regards to the CAC comment portion? Yes, of course, Matt Kelly.
Thank you, Vice Chair Mahmood. I just wanted to introduce our newest staff member. He's in my bottom, he's moving around now. John Huang, he's our new Director of Planning for the Authority. He started, 2 weeks before we went into shelter in place. So he's had to learn about us virtually. Sorry?
He hit the ground running.
Yeah, he definitely did. We'll get him in here to formally introduce himself and give a presentation, but I wanted to introduce him to you guys tonight so you know what he looks like and that you'll be seeing him in the future.
Thanks, Matt. I just want to say a couple words. Thanks for the introduction. As you all know, that Matt does so much work here. I'm here to help him out. He's been going here so busy the last few months. Anyways, I'm really glad to be joining the CCTA and working for the cities. And I'm really glad to see all the dedication that the citizens, you all are, you have been participating and been wanting to know what's going on with our agency. I think that's great to see. And I look forward to helping the cities and helping all of you and make my contributions to Contra Costa. I live in Contra Costa, so I have a vested interest in helping this county and helping everyone. Again, thanks again. And yeah, it's we had a rough start, but I think everybody endured, and great to see everybody hanging in there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong. And we appreciate you coming on at this difficult time. And, you know, we look forward to hearing from you throughout the year. Besides that, any members of the public or staff, any committee members have any comments about the current environment?
I don't see any hands, Vice Chair.
Okay, next on the agenda is reports. Does anybody have a summary report on the recent administration, projects committee, planning committee, or authority board meetings that they may have attended or watched or looked into?
No, but Mr. Chair, I would just note that with these meetings now going to completely live remote streaming video, I think I'll be trying to make the main authority meetings.
We look forward to that. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on. We're going to go into correspondence and communication, which is next on the agenda. Did everyone have a chance to review the news article in the packet that Matt's going to discuss in regards to Brentwood Discovery Bay, Oakley and Antioch?
Yeah, I didn't have much to say other than it's you know, we want our director Randy Iwasaki wants our work sites to be as safe as possible. So we worked out this deal with our contractor out there to get a COVID-19 monitor on site, and we think that's the responsible thing to do.
That is a good idea. The second thing that I want to look into is something that actually it might come under staff comments, and that is or news articles. I don't know if it showed up, but and you guys might know more being at the CCTA. I haven't been with the city of Oakley to our council meetings. Unfortunately, everything's online right now for the last few months, but we did sign an agreement with one of our last mile solution companies. So maybe, do you know more about that?
I don't.
I will get some more information, but I hear it's something that it's completely different and maybe autonomous. It may have a component that might, you know, solve some issues in East County cities. When I do get some information.
Sorry, I do know what you're talking about. That is Glideways. We can bring more information on that to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, our future agenda items will be posted beforehand for our Wednesday, June 24th meeting, which will be at 6 o'clock. One thing is, will that be on Zoom also? Staff?
I think we'll plan for it being that way.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we may plan, and this may change, but for now, we are adjourned. Our next regular meeting is proposed for Wednesday, June 24th at 6 p.m. If there are any changes, staff and this committee will inform the members of the public and other committee members. Thank you, everybody, for spending time with us and coming out online to this meeting. It is adjourned at 8:19 p.m. Yeah, guys, have a good weekend. Happy Memorial Day.
Have a good
Thanks
one.
for everyone's patience tonight. Have a good evening.
Thanks for the hard work.
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Thank you for your patience. Thank you. Good night.
Good